What is the truth in the stories we are told? We've been given a story of a world fueled by separation. We've become separate from one another, separate from the earth, ultimately separate from the true nature of ourselves. It's time we learn the truth. It's time you rewrite your story. It's time to realign with who it is that you really are. This is the fifth dimension.
You are infinite and eternal. We are infinite and eternal.
Our natural essence, we could say, is simply being.
We have this awakening coming together as a perfect storm.
We're ready for this. We have the capacity inside. We just got to find that.
All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I am joined by one of my previous favorite guests, somebody who has been on the show before, must have been probably almost 2 years ago at this point, which kind of dates me, I feel like, because I didn't realize I've been doing the show that long. But I am joined by Dr. Betty Kovacs, who is the author of Merchants of Light, the Consciousness That Is Changing the World. And I will say it is a prolific book, very profound. So Betty, I'm so excited to have you back on, be able to connect.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. I enjoyed our last time together. So
absolutely. And like I was saying before we hopped on, I reference your book in the conversation we have all the time, because it was definitely a foundational piece for my own exploration and sort of diving into, I think, a lot of the areas, we'll talk about today. So I would love to start, and this is a question I also have asked a few other people lately, because it's very interesting to hear the sort of, I would say, parallels on how people approach this question, and but also very unique perspectives. And I think this is really something that's outlined in your book, especially, and in your work. But that's sort of the central myth and really dominant myth of Western culture. And I would be curious, and I think maybe this could be a good way to sort of map the terrain we're in. What do you feel is that dominant myth of Western culture that we are experiencing, sort of playing out right now? It sort of feels like it's at a very rocky foundation, because a lot of people are beginning to recognize maybe some of the illusions of our dominant myths and the stories we've sort of defined ourselves by. So I was wondering if you could sort of outline that, and that could be sort of a good stepping stone to really explore, I guess, what that map even looks like. Because I think a lot of people are looking for solutions to our challenges, and I don't even necessarily know what the root of the story itself is.
yes. Well, myth is an interesting word because it's been misused in our culture because of the fact that we didn't have a myth of meaning.
Yeah.
And so anybody who came up with something that was outside the rational brain, it was just nonsense. Meaningless nonsense. And so myth came to be something that is not true.
Right.
Oh, that's just a myth. But the actual meaning of myth is that it's a story, a narrative that is not just made up by the conscious mind. It actually is structured by the organizing principles of our own psyche or soul. And sometimes it comes in a dream, or it comes out of this unconscious mind, you might say, but the principles are eternal, and they are all over the planet. And that's what's so much fun in studying myths and fairy tales. Fairy tale is another form of myth. Sometimes it's highly concentrated about the spiritual story and our psychic journey or psychological journey or spiritual journey. And the myth will have perhaps a lot of cultural knowledge or biographies, or even their idea of science at the time. It has a lot, but at the core of a true myth or a true tale about the human being and who we are and why we're here, then all over the world, you'll see these principles are similar, because it is always a story that nurtures our evolution, nurtures our growth and development and ability to love and connect and create. And it also is a story that informs us about our own immortality. And this is missing from the Western world. And so it's very often, every religion is rooted in direct experience of the spirit world. And later, people who haven't had that experience form doctrines and rules and regulations, but its core is in the direct experience. And that is really where our meaning comes from. And it's confirmed all over the world because these stories are similar all over the world. So the great thing is, when there's a false narrative, we should be able to detect it immediately. And in the West, these great stories of our becoming and of who we are have been inverted into something very negative about us. And this has been very damaging to our culture.
Right, definitely. And you can see how that plays out and the results of that inversion. Could you maybe dive into that a little deeper? Like, what do you feel it is or that has directly been inverted to take away that sort of deeper myth of meaning, right? Because the foundation of our origins and these origin stories, they are, to play Christianity, for example, like we're meant to become the Christ, right? The story of Jesus, like that's the Christ consciousness. Like there's such beauty and reverence that comes from that, right? And it's, so where is it that this has become, the inversion has become sort of the dominant, I would say, narrative that is told? Because most people don't, that we become, to use Christ again, most people follow Christ and they don't become him, right? And that's sort of the mainline thinking.
And you put your finger right on the true myth, is that the Christ story is about igniting our journey to becoming the Christ. And it's a very interesting thing, because if I can just go back a moment, the cultures that in the book I talk about are shamanic, mystic cultures. Yeah. In all of these cultures, there is that direct experience which creates the stories of who we are, that we are divine, immortal, and creative. And every myth of meaning has got to deal with death. If it doesn't deal with death, then when death comes, we have no myth to guide us. So, but all of these cultures didn't have that. And our ancestors worked so hard in so many different ways to preserve this knowledge. And then sometimes these cultures just, by history itself, disappeared. But basically in the Western world, what happened is that there were forces of powers, organizations of power that inverted the myth. For example, the Deuteronomist in 621 BCE inverted the stories of the first temple tradition in Judaism. The first temple tradition was a shaman mystic tradition. That was so lost, we didn't even know that until the 20th century through the work of Margaret Barker, an Old Testament scholar. And so the Deuteronomists came on the scene, and they took the beautiful story. This is one major story of inversion. And then don't let me forget to say how the Christ, which you've already pointed toward. But, in the Mesopotamian world and in Sumer and later in Egypt, but earlier before even Judaism, there were the symbol of the tree was a symbol of who we are. We're rooted deeply in the earth. We're part of the earth, and we grow up and touch the heavens with our branches. We reach for that light. And there is fruit on the tree. So the tree became the symbol of eating from life, the knowledge, the fruit, and that we would then know who we are. We would have that cosmic Christ experience. Right. And so I have in the book one of my favorite seals from Sumer, which is typical of the tree at that time, over 2000 BCE. And here is the goddess on one side of the tree, the god on the other. And because they're both necessary and they both existed in the first temple tradition, and that was another inverted myth, get rid of the feminine, have only the masculine. So because in the first temple tradition, the male and the female co-created the universe. He forgets that later and thinks only he did it. But at any rate, the god and goddess are they're sitting with the hands toward the tree, each one of them, and the fruit is hanging from it. It's take it for anyone who is ready. That is your destiny. That is your heritage. So then what the Deuteronomists did, and the only story we received, it's only in the 20th century we know the earlier stories that were true stories, true myths. Of course, life would have us take and understand and become who we are. It's just like an acorn. It has only in it what will evolve into a full oak tree. So the Deuteronomist, however, in order to have power over the Jewish people and to keep them, I'm sure there were some good intentions too, to keep them together. So, to give them their own identity, which they did have, however, but they, in order to have power over, they reduced the human being to a flawed human being who had sinned, and this sin would be passed on forever. So what they said is that here's a tree in the Garden of Eden, and God said to Adam and Eve, you can eat of anything in the garden, but you cannot eat of this one tree, the tree of good and evil. Really, there's only one tree, the tree of life, of consciousness, but they put it into two. And of course, any parent knows if you say to your child, you can have anything but not this one thing, that you've directed their attention. That's the first thing they're going to do. At any rate, Eve takes the fruit because the serpent tells her that God was wrong. You're not going to die if you eat of this. And indeed, he was correct, because when we eat of it, we know we're immortal. Of course, we don't die. We're told you're going to die if you eat from it. At any rate, she does. She gives it to Adam. And when God comes back, he punishes them. They have disobeyed. This is completely opposite of the true myth. And so he throws these unworthy people out of the garden and has an angel with a sword guarding it so that they can never eat from the tree of life. So then he says to Eve, because you have done this thing, you're going to suffer in childbirth, and yet you will desire your husband, but you will have pain in childbirth. Should not, that here is one of the most sacred things that we as human beings experience. And then he says to Adam, and you will till and scratch the earth, and it will be very difficult. In other words, he's condemning nature, really. Nature cannot be what it is. And Adam is going to suffer. And then for you both, you are from dust, and dust you will return. Well, we're not from dust.
Right.
We are out of the cosmic explosion of divinity. We are everything in the universe is divine. Well, that was a complete inversion. And then when the church came along, and around the 4th century AD, then it kept that horrible myth. And my Jewish friends tell me that one myth wasn't so strong in their lives because there were so many commentaries later, that talked in different ways about it. We didn't have that I say we because I was brought up, my parents didn't go to church, but I was kind of in a Protestant area. And that was central. You are nothing. You are sinful. You are flawed. You can only be redeemed, not by any of your own experiences, but by God. So here was this horrible, as I got older, I always wondered about it as a kid, but as I got older, I thought, nothing could be more terrible. We can't live with this kind of myth. This is so destructive. And we are seeing and have seen all along with our children who have to eat that myth, to take that myth, that it destroys many of them if they don't have the love. And then just one more thing, and then I will stop talking, is that the Jews, there were those Jews who did not agree with that at all. And later, many of them went to around the Dead Sea. So these mystics around the Dead Sea did not go along with this Second Temple tradition that had inverted these myths. And they said, we are the true covenant of Israel. And that it was to have direct inner experience, because only out of that can come a true myth. But then there were Essenes all over the Palestinian area and in Egypt, who and the Therapeutae, who were mystics. So they would have nothing to do with this inversion, but we didn't know about them until the 20th century either, because the inversion was our heritage. It's what we got, and it was a false heritage. But there were Jews who then tried to give birth to the old shaman mystic tradition, and that was the myth of Jesus. He was one of these mystics, and he taught. In fact, we now know that there was a secret, a hidden tradition that Jesus taught in the early years, but that was destroyed by the church, and it was to go within. We only know that this is true because after the war, not only did we find the Dead Sea Scrolls of these mystics, Jews who would have nothing to do with Second Temple, we found the Nag Hammadi text of Christianity, and here is Jesus, and he is teaching exactly what you said, the true myth. He's turning these myths back around and saying, no, it's that I did not come to die for you. I did not come to save you. I came to remind you of who you are. And do not follow the Christ, but become the Christ. That's the true myth.
Exactly. And it kind of speaks to the idea that the Christ itself is not a name, but a title that can be really earned and embodied by anybody, right? When we step into that realm of Christ consciousness, which is that pure radiance in that space of unconditional love and its fullest capacity, right? And you definitely hit the nail on the head in terms of how the inverted myth really has, I would say, shaped modern society today. I mean, we look back for the last couple thousand years, you can see slowly how these roots become deeper and deeper and deeper. And we don't even have that sort of conscious connection to what our ancestors taught from the very beginning, which is that going inward, finding the deeper myth of meaning, which definitely would love to dive into in just a minute, because I think that's what we're lacking in our society. It's one on top of the fact that we're taught to shame ourselves from the very beginning, essentially, like what you talked about with the story of Adam and Eve. We're shamed from God directly, like that creates a nihilistic, almost we sort of have judgment against and want to get back at the fact that we're even alive. Like, this is a shameful existence. That's what that story tells.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah. I used to love Alan Watts would say, when parents would say, who do you think you are? And he said, I am Shiva. Mm-hmm. I am the Christ. Yep. And of course, it just seems so crazy in our culture because not only did we invert the sacred myths of who we are, the church then would not allow scientists to study any inner experience, because in the book I talk about how these ancient cultures were destroyed or controlled, but then they emerge in 5 different Renaissance periods. We're the 5th, but there was the third was a period in which, and that was at 1600, in which there was just a resurgence of scientific, because always with the mystic, there is the scientific as the given time, because when we experience cosmic consciousness, it's how does it work? That's the other part of us. We want to experience it and we want to understand it rationally, so that both parts are important. But these people, and they were in Prague, in the old Bohemia, and also Heidelberg in England. They were also not in England, in Germany. And in England, there were also these scientists and mystics and engineers and mathematicians. In fact, it was this group that gave mathematics to science as a way of studying and understanding nature. So these people had all kind of come together in Bohemia. It was possible at that time, after so much suppression. And for 20 years, they did all kinds of things. Well, the moment the church really saw which way they were going, they destroyed them. Mm-hmm. And then there was the 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics. And then in 1660, they were destroyed by 1620. In 1660, the Royal Society for Science developed in England. Some of these people had been a part of that Renaissance. And mystics, they were looking into the inner world to understand the cosmos as well as the outer world. The church did not want any of that. And so by 1660 in the war, that just in some towns in Germany, the 30 Years' War had reduced the population by half. Can you imagine?
No.
So think what we were at that time when scientists knew you do not touch anything about the mystical or inner experience. So they did their work and eventually forgot that they were even being suppressed. And then science began to believe that this limited study of just matter, just the outer world, is all there is. These first scientists knew different. And so we inherited that dreadful myth, false myth story that there's nothing but matter. You have no meaning. There is no meaning, no purpose. You can have no effect on nature. And when you're dead, you're dead. This is the worst that the only culture that has ever had such a devastating worldview. So here we had a religious worldview that we are unworthy and flawed, and only God can redeem us. And then the other one, no, there's nothing anyhow. Don't worry about redeeming because there's nothing to redeem. And so we had these two, the religion story, science story. It was totally devastating. What could we do to bring up children with those two stories?
Right. And exactly. And it's the exact, I look at children now, like in what is their sort of natural wild element that they embody, right? That beautiful spontaneity. You can see that our natural state is in that beauty and in that reverence and in that curiosity. And it's only through the programming and really the beating in of this narrative that you just described where we actually lose touch with that. And it's interesting because to integrate a deeper personal myth of meaning, right? To actually come back to I would say the Christ consciousness, it's really just about taking away all the old stories and actually
it is.
It's not even so much about learning it. It's just like let me unpack and remove all of these layers and these stories. Exactly.
That's absolutely true. And you remind me of when my son was a little guy, and he'd always tell me his dreams, and we talked about that kind of thing. But he discovered that his grandfather he had a grandmother, but he wanted to know what about the grandfather. In fact, he had two grandmothers, one here in the States and one in Hungary, but no grandfathers. And so he wanted to know what happened to them. And so I said, well, I tried to explain it. And at that time, I was spending my life trying to find out, but I didn't know for sure. So I said to him, Pishti, I don't really know what happens at death. Some people say this, some say that. Yeah. And he's probably thinking, oh, but he said, you don't know? Well, he said, of course they go on. There's a place where they go. He didn't call it conscience. There's a place where they go. They're there. I know they are. And I thought, he was so confident. And I thought, well, that's kind of shameful on my part.
Right. Yeah, but it goes to show you, like he had that understanding of this is what happens, because it's sort of an inherent knowing within us. It's only when we get caught in that trap of the rational mind that we try and overcomplicate these things. And, I look at some of the work that's taking place now, maybe somebody like Joe Dispenza, who's sort of bridging the gap between science and these sort of mystic traditions, or, we look to some of the researchers of the ancient temples and like the Freddie Silvas, and sort of diving into what are sort of the clues of the past that these shamanic traditions left us, right? And we kind of do see, I guess, the pushback again from some of the dogmatic ideologies, whether it's certain areas of church or science or whatever it may be, right? So to me, it feels like we have an opportunity right now to choose the direction that we're going to go. It feels like in the past, when we've had these sort of resurgences of this mystical tradition, ultimately it came and it kind of went, like it left again in a sense, because
it was suppressed each time.
Right. And I think now we have an opportunity where the individual, I think, has more levels of or opportunities for empowerment and to create change on a collective scale, maybe more so than any time in history, right? Because of our technologies and because of how, I look at the conversation we're having now, right? To me, this just feels like a manifestation of the fact that we are interconnected on a deeper level. And here we are, we're honoring that through technology, right? And so
And through technology to so many more people, yes.
right. And so I
And
think
I never heard a conversation like this when I was in high school or even college.
right. And so it's kind of, we have the opportunity to get this out there. So it feels like we're sort of at a moment of where this can be our rite of passage, if you will. Feels like we don't have any actual rites of passage in society built in, and that may be the I would say cause of a lot of unnecessary suffering, because we don't, a rites of passage symbolizes, like for the men, an example, in different indigenous cultures, the rite of passage was the death of the boy so the man can be born, right? And I would say women have a biological rite of passage in the form of childbirth, but again, it's not honored, it's not sacred, right? So
yes, when you think about, and also when they begin to menstruate, that they're in ancient cultures, the women would be together, they would go through an initiation into womanhood. They became women at that point. And I think that is so important in every culture, to have that time when, as kids, we can just play and be and part of nature, and it's just wonderful. And yet then there, in the ancient indigenous cultures, then there was that time, and in the case of the male, in case of the female, in which then their elders took them to a place to initiate them. And it would always be to initiate them into a larger dimension of life. Here you've played this role as a child, and now know that you're a part of the cosmos, and that you're sacred, you're divine, you have purpose. And I think that there is such meaning in the world that each of us can create to have this, and that would be an opening to a larger dimension and direct experience, we hope. Because in many of these initiations, there were sometimes they used sacred medicine, and always from the elders who gave it to the young, and quite different in our culture in the 60s, wasn't it? But it was in a sacred context that this medicine is from nature. You join your consciousness with it, and you realize the larger purpose of all life, plant, animal, soil, earth, and the wind, everything. You're part of that. And or sometimes it was different things, like going into the cave culture. And when I went into those caves, I could realize, and then we didn't go into the kind of really difficult places, but it was dark and we had to crawl and we had to bend over. But in some of those initiations, they had to crawl a long way. And then when they finally get to an opening, they're changed, their consciousness is changed by that time. But then there could be music and dancing, whatever. And one of the great visions is that they are a part of everything. They are the animal that they hunt. They are the dart that kills them. They are the water. They are both hunted and hunter. They realize everything is one. To realize that helps them to see that they are part of the large dimension of the cosmos. And the women would also realize, through various types of music, chanting, who knows, there are many, many methods of triggering the brain into this cosmic consciousness that we're all born out of. And so then they wouldn't say what some of the young people say, that the earth is dead. Some people, I think that the man in Michigan who shot so many people said that everything is dead. Well, that's what we've given our children. We haven't initiated them into this vast truth of who they are. And what can we expect?
Right, exactly.
I think the children who have had the love and the care and the teachings, even if they've not been initiated, that saves them from that. But we all need that direct experience.
Absolutely. And that very story of everything is dead creates a life where we ourselves are so, I would say, dull in our life force energy and in our having
Yeah.
our hearts open, that we live a life that really is an extension of our fear of death in a sense, right? Because we view death as this finality. So what is the purpose of living if this is it? And there's so you can really see how that permeates all aspects of our culture, and it's really tragic in a lot of ways. But at the same time, you almost have to wonder how much of this is necessary for us to actually remember I would say, the true origins of ourselves on a deeper level, right? You sort of have the natural polarities that exist in nature, right? Through one action, you'll have an opposite but equal reaction, right? So if in a way, we're swinging so far on the pendulum towards scientific materialism and very really much viewing ourselves as this sort of finite, lifeless construct. In a way, it feels like there's an opportunity to have the pendulum swing back in the other way, where we open our hearts in such a radical and newly dramatic way that because these myths have taken place for so long, uh, they weren't extreme enough for us to actually recognize the illusions within them. And we could sort of just, I guess they played to our mind, like where it's like, oh, we'll go along with this. We're here. We won't question it so deeply. But now, because this is it, I think the myth is getting so extreme in the sense of how the roots have spread. We really have to open our hearts in such a new radical way that it almost creates a deeper meaning to even the original stories of who we are, which were built on that unconditional love and built in the reverence for life. Because I think we can hold such a greater appreciation for it in a sense, and really
Oh,
integrate it with with some of the wisdom we have from going to this opposite extreme, if you will.
well, it's, Heraclitus said you can only go so far in one direction, and
Yeah.
then it'll turn you around. I hope that's true, because what we're seeing today, and just some of the examples we've talked about, is a tremendous pathology, a tremendous being severed from the right brain that's symbolic and connects us to the invisible world, and the heart, which the Sufis tell us, and we know now, the heart is the organ of soul. And if we bring our consciousness into the heart, it's a brain component. It gives more energy to the brain and information to the brain that we usually recognize as brain than the brain components give to the heart component, the other, like right and left and so on. So we've failed to recognize that. And in so doing, by severing ourselves from our ability to experience something faster, we have constructed this very great darkness. So if we think from 621 BCE, intensified again by the Roman Church, and then intensified again by its censorship of science, so that we have two major myths, neither of which takes us inward to know who we are. So we have now people for a long time have thought, well, nature isn't alive, it isn't consciousness, do what you wish with it. And some of the indigenous people are saying, you're destroying the world with this attitude. And like the Kogi and the High Sierras are saying, we've tried to keep the balance, but you've gone so far, we can't keep the balance any longer. So we have this darkness that is so profound, so empty in the children, now adults, who are absolutely convinced we're flawed. They really still believe the old Deuteronomist tale that the human being is flawed, unworthy. And so they are saying, we have to make you over. We're in charge of evolution now. And this is very dangerous with the technology that we have and the intent to create us better than the flaw. But they have no consciousness that we can experience cosmic consciousness. They don't know that. So they're saying, looking at the world as it's all material, it's not worth much, you're flawed, not worth much. I guess what I'm trying to say, we know what's going on in that department, that this darkness is what we have inherited through these inversions. We need to understand it and see where that darkness is in ourselves so that we can heal that. And I think that, to go back to your statement, which is accurate, certainly very much so, is that when we look at what we're up against, what this suppression has caused for centuries, that it triggers our own evolutionary principles into action.
Yeah.
And when David Nicole has written about that quite well, when he said, we must unmask the darkness that all of this is created. And in unmasking it, he said, I feel like I've been taken on a highlight tour of my own darkness. But he said, their anti-evolutionary principles ignite our evolutionary principles. And now we're on the journey. We're on the journey to save ourselves and our culture and our world and our soul. And so, yeah, I agree with you. This is an explosion of these, what has probably been dormant in us, these evolutionary principles are coming out of us, and we're discovering all of this. The 20th century, we discovered what happened to us, and now we're discovering all kinds of ways of knowing who we are and knowing what the whole game is about. So I absolutely agree with you.
It's like that remembrance process is sort of all systems go right now. There's no holding it back. You can't even choose otherwise.
And yeah, and you know, we're all together. If there are individuals who are thinking this way, they're a part of the human species. They are us. They are part of who we are. And the healing of ourselves can help heal nature and our brothers and sisters, you know?
Exactly. All of the external is really just a cosmic mirror in a sense, right?
It is.
It's and what you were speaking of makes me think of Paul Levy wrote about what he called the Wetiko virus, right?
Yes.
And that's a term that's been used in many indigenous cultures, and it's that virus of mind. And really, when I say mind, it's almost in a collective sense, right? Capital M mind, this sort of cutting off from our true creative, I would say feminine spirit. And ultimately that has created the rational, I guess, processing and world that we're living in. And it's only through that reintegration on an individual level that we're actually going to create this sort of, I think, needed paradigm shift that we're speaking of. And, you know, because there aren't really, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where there's going to be a legislative solution or a top-down imposed solution, right?
It has come from within and out, from the bottom up.
Exactly.
But that's really interesting with Paul Levy, yes, and with Tico. And we could say, you know, that the particular pathology that we see in our world today, that darkness, that it's in us, and that's why we have to unmask it and understand it in ourselves. But I think that, well, Carl Jung said it, I think, well, he said that the numinous, that is the soul, which is always symbolized as feminine because it's always birthing and maintaining and rebirthing. But he said, to the degree that we are able to experience the numinous, to that degree, we will be saved from the curse of pathology. And I think that we experience Wetiko when we are not open to this divine nature of ourselves and nature and the cosmos. And we forget that not only are we creators and we co-create as a species and with all life, but also with the cosmos. So it's this huge thing that we've forgotten. And what do? This pathology, when we don't have a connection to the numinous, to the heart, cosmic consciousness, we want to control everybody else. We want to have power over, and there's never enough. And so this darkness is the pathology of the need to control and to destroy it. And in doing so, it destroys itself and everybody else and everything else. So we see this process that's been going on for generations of destroying the earth, because after all, it had no consciousness, no life, take what you will. And so this process of destruction, and it's also self-destruction.
Mm. Yeah.
And those who are seeking power ultimately destroy themselves and the world. So yeah, that Paul Levy is so important. I want to go back to Dispenza and Silva. Dispenza could really, he shows us what you can do. I mean, and healing himself the way he did. I mean, that's wonderful evidence. And then with Freddie Silva, he actually helps us to see the sacredness in these places. And I used to think with the crop circles, what an incredible experience that the human being is experiencing, and you never hear it on the nightly news.
Right.
I mean, and we know now that some of them are man-made, but we know that others are not. We know absolutely. And Freddie Silva has done, I think, a beautiful job in awakening us to these things. So yes, there are people like that. There's so many of us in our species who are becoming conscious and are looking for this. You and I are, we are looking for this. There are millions of others who are. And I think this is the time when we either do it this time, because this is the fifth Renaissance, this has attempted to integrate, it rises into culture, like in the High Middle Ages. That was very powerful, very, very powerful. And it was connected to direct experience. And it was in the cathedrals. These people who built the cathedrals, though, they weren't limited by doctrine of the church. They were people who had inner experience. And then it was tried to do it in the Italian Renaissance, then the Rosicrucian in the 1600s. Then that was in the whole German thing, and then in Goethe, the whole Romantic period in which pietism was alchemy, it resurged, and in England, and every time it was pushed down. Now it's back up, but so is the darkness, the most intense, with the greatest tools that we've ever had to destroy ourselves, both inwardly and outwardly. So I think this time we've got to do it.
Yeah.
And I think there is that knowledge that we're about this because this is our life. It's the life of the species and the planet.
Exactly. And there is that, I definitely feel almost a sense of urgency. Which is driving the, I would say, the action and the willingness to embody the role of the visionary, right? I mean, I think the visionary, I heard a quote, and I don't know who it was, but it said the downfall of civilizations is because they listen to the politicians and not the artists and visionaries, right?
Oh,
and that's
wonderful. That's so good. Yes.
And there's a lot of truth to it, because that is where these new creative ideas emerge. I mean, a lot of people were trained to go through life and sort of just regurgitate what we hear from there and there and there. And there isn't any actual going inward and sitting with the silence and seeing what emerges from that space, right? Because that's where the true creation actually happens.
It is. And how many scientists even say, we got this idea, either in a dream or an intuition and so on. So yes, I think that our education will have to change, because we have, by the church restricting science just to the left brain and studying of matter, that was one serious blow. And then there were at the same time, a little bit later, it really flourished, scientists, the 17th century again still, and into later time, is that the French philosophers, here they had this so-called enlightenment, but what the real enlightenment began in Bohemia. They're seeing all the things in Bohemia that we're saying now. It's for the planet, for nature, for the world, the going inward, the bringing the left and right together. They had all of that. And there was Giambattista Vico in Italy in the 1700s as well, who understood that the right brain, he doesn't call it that, but that he calls it the symbolic brain, develops before the conceptual left brain, and it feeds it. And there must always be a dynamic and integral continuum of movement between the two. He knew that. And yet, at the same time, these 17th century philosophers in France are saying, we have reached the apex of rational thought. We are the intelligent people of the universe and the world. Certainly, anything that came before, like what these myths, these symbolic things, we don't need that anymore, only rational. And that was what carried the day, not these brilliant scientists and mystics or the brilliant symbolists, Vico. No, but it was these philosophers along with the just a limited science. And that's what ruled the day. And yet we keep coming back in these Renaissance periods and remembering and Jung was wonderful in helping us to do that, to realize that as he discovered this heart, this numinous, this soul, our ability, the symbolic brain to inform that, he realized that going inward, and he called that whole process of entering the labyrinth and finally getting to the center of the numinous is our destiny. And he called it the individuation process. So he was a great leader in it, for at least for me in my life, when I was searching where, how, from the 50s on.
Right. And he sort of paved the way for what you just described, the individuation process and the recognition of what is ultimately driving the collective unconscious, right? Because everything that we're seeing is just that collective unconscious. It's the shadows in action, really revealing themselves. And, the greatest atrocities of the world, right? All the worst of darkness. If we go deep enough in ourselves, we can find that same darkness. We can recognize where our own conditions, or if we were growing up in a certain environment with a certain story, with certain elements, we're capable of anything that is happening out there, right? It's all a part of us as a interconnected species, and we have to actually recognize that fact and really take ownership for where it is that we are, right? As I think it's interesting because you can look at all of the warring of society and things like that. It's really just a macrocosm for the individual self-experience, right? There's the wars between religions is no different between the individual self and the war he has with God on a daily basis, right? For a lot of people. And it just plays out on a sort of larger scale. So I think there needs to be a deep level of almost self-responsibility. So even when we're trying to initiate this shift, we don't fall back into the same pattern of trying to label particular figures or particular ideologies or stories as an other or as an evil.
It's so important, especially now, within the states, for example. I mean, that back and forth, Republican, Democrat, you think I have friends who can see the fault in one party, but not at all in the other. Right. And then on the opposite side. And it's as though, I mean, when I have really good friends on both sides, and it's so important to know, hear these beautiful people who they may have some ideas of how it can be healed in the way that I don't, but they're working, they want the same things, for their children, for their lives. We all want love, whether we know it or not. I think that through the emptiness in my own life of not having a myth of meaning, I couldn't accept the science story, but I was scared to death it might be true. And the religion story, I love the stories of Jesus. Here was a remarkable, he had experienced Christ consciousness, and that was wonderful story. But I couldn't believe, and this was the other inverted myth I didn't get to, I guess, and you had said it already, is that instead of Jesus igniting in us that journey for ourselves to know that, we had to worship him and follow him, and we are nothing but someone. So we've already talked about that, I realize now. So that's so important. But it's just so hard because I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe what the church told me. So I was like everybody else, who was really searching. And during that time of search, in that emptiness of searching, it was the people I loved who loved me that saved me. The relationships, the connections, the love. If I hadn't had that, who knows what I would have been? And I think when you were talking about the unconscious, I think that we can fall into, again, the pathology of just going by unconscious instincts of rather than allowing the whole mind to function, in which we could see the purpose and meaning and love in the universe and make very different choices. And I think we have within us all of the self-destruction that has ever been on the planet. We also have the genius and the Christ consciousness, the cosmic consciousness potential within us. And when we make choices, if we make the choice to know I am immortal, I am going to live forever, my consciousness, and I have this time to do something, and we're all divine. We're all a part of it. In the cave cultures, they understood that, it seems. They knew that the animals were sacred, and they had such a difficulty in having to kill them to eat. And so they needed that myth of meaning and contact with them. I remember my husband, after the death of our son and the visions that we had, at one point, and that almost broke his heart, the animals came to him, and as a message for the species, we give our bodies freely to you if you will work for the saving of the earth, for this consciousness to be reborn again on the earth. He couldn't tell it without just tears coming down his, just that beauty of the consciousness in the animal world. But we needed, and that's what our ancestors did. They had great respect for the animal world and gratitude. And when I was in Siberia, the one hunter there said, it's true, it still takes place. When we go hunting, we get the vision of where the animal will be, and we kill the animal, but we give such gratitude and thankfulness for it's that interconnectedness and that love and respect.
Exactly. And it's that recognition that survival will only continue on in a harmonious way, in the sense when you are connected at a deeper level, and you recognize the reverence and the beauty of it all, right? Because when you get so entrenched in it's one thing to, I guess, go and hunt and do it in a way where you're not conscious about it and you end up killing the planet. It's an extension of what we're talking about earlier with the scientific materialism and that sort of, but there's a time and place where we have to almost embrace the death process.
Yes.
And where, let's say we hunt a deer, and that's sustaining us so we can give to the planet on a deeper level, which is why that animal is willing to sacrifice. And I think this goes back to the teachings even of Jesus, in the sense of self-sacrifice, right? The willingness to let who we think we are die, so we can step into this more infinite and eternal, I would say, identification. Because I think a lot of our stories and our hardships, it comes from that self-identification with the temporary and with the sort of finite experience of ego and identity, and I do this and I do that, and this, I'm on this sort of linear timeline of birth, school, this, that, sort of the typical life path, whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with that life path, but we get very attached to the linear experience of life, as opposed to sort of the I would say the reverent and sacred totality that goes beyond just life.
That's beautiful. Yes. And I so agree with you. And I think that, when we're young, first of all, we're children, everything is wonderful if we have a good home life, and then we're initiated, hopefully, in some way or other. Sometimes the cosmos has to intervene, since we aren't doing it for our children, and to seeing this larger picture. But if we don't have that, and even if we do have some glimpse of it, we live the patterns, the stories that we're told to live, and that nature tells us, that we go through school, and many people, it's their myth of meaning is doing well in school and achieving this, achieving that, and going on getting degrees, and then or making money, having things, but these can never last if they don't understand that we're going to die. That's very, very important. And I feared death when I was young because my mother's parents were both orphans, and her mother then died young, and I was so afraid that I would lose my mother, which carried my soul in those days, and I just was so afraid of death. And I think that we of course that's the end of everything. We're told that's the end of everything, or believe that you go to a heaven. That didn't seem very creative to me, the way it was presented to me, but I didn't know for sure. So my myth of meaning for a long time was the search itself, trying to find. And I had understood a lot by the time our only child was killed in a car accident, Pishti. And yet it wasn't until both Istvan, my husband, and I experienced his consciousness after his death in such full form. And it was, then I knew. And but I hadn't known. I'd hoped, I thought I had information probably, and the near-death experiences really gave me a lot of hope. But it's this a direct experience that is our heritage, every single one of us. And when Pishti, just the day after his memorial, he returned, and it was so clear, and he just wanted us to know he's fine, everything, he's alive, and that he's still creating, and he wanted us to know what the earth is going to be going through in these next years. And it's such precise information that my husband experienced, and I did. My husband hadn't been interested before, but after the first vision, that was it, changed. He never questioned again. And I think because I'd had too much training on the left brain that I had trouble, but not when I was in the vision, but gradually. And I think this is important for us all to know, that we have been so left brain trained, especially if we've gone through the university system or even not, we've got that root there. And I looked all my life for the other. And then when it was really coming through strongly, after I was out of the vision, my left brain would pop in and say, question. But gradually I could answer those questions. To it. And gradually I began to achieve what Vico talked about. What comes in the right brain goes into the left brain and back, and there's that continuum. And I love the Mayan statement that polarity is the loom on which reality is strung.
I love that.
Isn't that beautiful? And we've severed the loom right down the middle, broken it, torn it apart. And so it's weaving that loom back together again so that we can integrate the right brain, which is connected to the heart, just connected to the cosmos, into our rational minds, because that's a beautiful mind too. It wants to understand it in rational terms. In the other terms, these two need each other, but it really took the actual experience of the death of our son for me to, not just his death, but his returning with that consciousness. I'm so grateful for that. But I think that also the stories of people like the near-death experiencers. I was listening to a man the other day who said, his ambition was mainly to make money and so on. He said, I hadn't been a very good husband. And he said, I had that ambition. Well, when he died, he was out. He said, I was in grass up to my waist, and I realized that grass was conscious. Everything was conscious. And the actual experience of that just totally changed him. He had many other experiences. He came back a very different man. And I think this is it. This is what saves us, is the experience ourselves of cosmic consciousness, and other people along the way who experience it first can keep us open for it. That happened for me. They kept my mind open and hopeful until I could.
Absolutely. And that's, I think what you spoke on is exactly the peak experiences, like you just said, that are going to be the I would say a savior. We don't need a savior externally, but it's going to be lead to the internal shift. Yes. And I think at the peak experiences, what we need to do is not just rely on one peak experience, but keep coming back to the space of reverence and beauty. Like I can step outside and I could choose to be in my mind and just go through the patterns of the day, right? Or I could listen to the birds singing, and I could feel the sun on my skin, and I could breathe in the fresh air a little bit deeper, right? And sort of connect in the presence of the moment. And it's that connection when you allow the mind to sort of just subside for a moment, or just notice when it's making a thought or a judgment, and just being okay with it, because that's what it's bound to do it anyways. But when you can really connect to that reverence that's always there,
Yes.
yeah.
No, please.
I was gonna say, when you connect to that reference that's always there, that's where that integration with the right and the left brain really comes in, because you can continue to, the questions you have, it's like, all right, the thing about questions, a great question always leads to another question, is what I'm discovering. So you answer one question through an experience. It's like, well, now I would like to uncover this. Well, I'm not going to be able to necessarily rationalize it. Maybe I will, maybe not. You kind of have to feel like each question, but you go back to that space of reverence and beauty, and it leads you to that answer almost naturally. Like it really finds you in a way. You don't really, you don't have to go seeking
That's
in such a way that we're used to.
Yeah, you've beautifully described what Vico was urging. That's exactly what he meant, and beautifully said. And back to the Savior, it's interesting that I have been, I think in probably both books, I talk about Richard Maurice Buck, because he was the first person that I read who had experienced cosmic consciousness. He even wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness. And he had been with friends one night talking, reading poetry, and discussing it. On the way home, this was in the 1800s. He was the end of the 1800s. He was actually Walt Whitman's doctor, but he lived in Canada. And so when he got in the carriage to go home, he suddenly thought that the city ahead was on fire. And then he realized this light was coming within him. And within those, he said, I have no idea how long it lasted, but he said, I knew in that moment that everything is alive and divine, and that we are immortal, and that this consciousness is something we will all experience. We all have access to, but this incredibly, the love, that we're born out of the love and the consciousness of the universe. And so when he wrote about it, what he said is exactly what you said. The Savior, our Savior, is not the person, but Christ consciousness itself. That is what is meant by the Savior. So exactly what you said.
Oh, and it's beautiful to know that, because when you know that that's the Savior, that's always there anyways, right? So it's beautiful to know that the answers that we're really looking for, they're already here. We don't need to create this grand master plan or come up with some crazy invention to save the world. Like, it's already here. When the answers that we need, all we have to do is just sort of take a step back to access them. And certainly there's the work that we, to bring this to people, like there's a lot of work in that, but to find the solutions we're seeking, every single person, all they have to do is take a step back. And when each person is able to do that, that is going to change this collective mind, the collective bandwidth of where we're actually resonating, and everything else will just fall into place after that, because individuals will live to their own experience and create the experience in community, and how that plays out on the grand stage, it'll just be the representation of individual states of awareness on a larger scale.
It's at living from the heart, which you described so well. And Heart Math is an organization in which people could go to, and they have a lot of different exercises that help you to go. But one, it's, usually these things are so simple. One is to simply shift, get in a quiet place, shift your consciousness to the heart. And so they say you can even hold your heart, so you're reminded, down here, and ask in your meditation, ask a question of the universe, of the heart consciousness. And just in the breathing, just keep your focus in the heart of breathing in the cosmos and letting it out, breathing and being at one with it, where these minds are connected, as you've described. And that you might get it right during meditation, but you might not, but you will get it. Is that when you put a question to the heart, you will get an answer, just as you were describing. It's within us. The Savior is within us. And certainly there are those who have gotten quite off base sometimes with it, but that is simply because we don't have our focus truly in the heart. And we need each other. We need each other to check ourselves with too, you know. And when someone, as Jung used to say, that we are God, but we are the divine, but, you know, there's an egotistical inversion of that we don't want to fall into.
Right. It reminds me of Ram Dass used to tell a story of visiting his brother in I think it was some sort of institution where they put him in the institution because he was going around and saying God, like, I am God, I am this, but it was in a very egotistical manner. And Ram Dass walks in there in his robes and his beads, and his brother's in like a full suit and tie. And he's like, and when Ram Dass was about to leave, he asked, his brother asked him, he's like, why is it that they're letting you leave? You're dressed up like this weird guru from the mountains, and here I am stuck in here. And Ram Dass said something along the lines of, are you Jesus? And he's like, yeah, I am. He's like, am I Jesus? And his brother said, no. And he's like, that's why they won't let you leave, because he was stuck in
that's a good story. I like that.
It is stuck in that egotistical mindset, if you will, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But and it's a beautiful reminder, I think, now that we're already, I think, to put it in context of the hero's journey, which is something I think we talked about in our last podcast we did, you know, we're already kind of on the journey. And I think whether a lot of people are conscious of it or not, they've sort of already left the mundane world that they were living in, especially with, you know, the shifts we've seen in the last couple of years of, you know, it kind of proves the point that change is going to be something that's whether we're conscious of it or not, it's going to happen. And so I think we've left the world of the previous ordinary, and we've kind of stepped into the belly of the beast of what our reality is, and into the shadows and into the darkness. And it's there, whether we choose to, I guess, bury our heads in the sand of it or not. And it's interesting. I would like to hear your thoughts on where do you feel we are on that hero's journey, and what sort of, are there archetypal forces that people can tap into, or roles they can embody to really continue on this path? Because there's so much, I would say, uncertainty in terms of the exact direction, but I think these archetypes can really help ground it and give a map of sorts.
Yes, I think so. And I think that, you know, that in the Grail legend, it always is that once you ask the question, when you want to know what's going on here anyway, you know, to question, that is the opening of the door to the journey. And so you enter this labyrinth and you go round and round and round, and each experience that you have, it can be a very dark experience. It can be facing our own darkness. Of course, we're going to have to do that. We all have darkness, but out of that darkness can come light. Is that by knowing, by facing it? The myths used to always say, you know, if you turn away and run from something scary, it becomes worse. If you turn around and face it, you will find you have within you what it takes to deal with it. So the labyrinth journey, yes, we're going to meet these demons, you might say, this darkness within ourselves. We're going to meet that. But what is there consistently, always, never absent, are the forces that help us to deal with it. We have that within us, is that for every darkness we face, we have tremendous light within us if we allow that to come. And in so doing, we see that darkness for what it is. And then we go on and on to the next. And what is so clear from these journeys, or the journeys of the past, the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, is that there is this help all along the way. It is within us. And, you know, there were quite a few scholars who said, oh, well, in the Western world, we didn't do this journey. You know, we developed rational consciousness first, which is probably correct, so that we could really develop the kind of rationality. No, I don't agree with that, because all of the archetypal stories, the true myths, show us, oh, no, you don't do it that way, because look at the world that we have. That's what you get when you do it that way. In each part of the journey, it's the the loom of polarities. You can't cut the loom in two and go shooting out like a star into the sky where you're going to burn out. No, you have to do business with the polarity, which is in this case, the symbolic brain, heart consciousness, what we call the feminine that gives birth to the rational mind. So no, you have to, it's like Goethe said in his work on plants, it's a spiral. We go from one polarity to the other, or like you've described with the right brain and the left brain, it's that continuum of movement, because then the kind of consciousness you have, it's not way over here on the left side or way over here on the right side. It's going right up the stem, so to speak, if we use the metaphor of the plant. And then always in each part of the journey, these two are united, and it's a much different consciousness. So I think we still fall into that that false kind of thinking that we have such a brilliant left brain. Look at all we've accomplished. No, we always think of how to just use our accomplishment to destroy something. You know, this kind of consciousness is not what we want, and wouldn't have had we developed it within the totality of the loom. So I think that there's every step of the way, we have who we are, the inner light, and those who've gone before us, they are here working with us. And if I had heard that in high school, I wouldn't have known what to think of it. I know now that these luminous beings are here on the planet. They are working with us. They're in that labyrinth with us, on the journey with us. And every step of the way, if we're open for that light and that help, we have it. And Karl Karenyi is a wonderful Hungarian, it happens, but classical scholar. And I love how he describes this journey. You go round and round and down into the depths of who you are. And at the center, you meet the divine, the cosmic mind, not as other, but as self.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful?
That's so beautiful, because it resonates as truth within me. When I look at the deepest part of myself, that is the deepest form of my own identification, I guess you will. When you get down to it, who are you beyond name, beyond this, beyond that? That's exactly what it is. And I think when you can connect, like actually not just rationalize that, but actually connect with that and sit in it, is when you recognize what you just described, in the sense of always being supported and always being connected to this grander field. And in a way that sort of opens up the journey so you can really play within it, right? It kind
of, and not be afraid. I mean, we may come up to tough times, but I think now that I am older, and of course, you know, we think of death, and I have no fear of it. And I feel that as long as I can be creative, I'll be alive and well. and I realize that, you know, it's a danger in the Western world. We can think, oh, I wish I could have done more. But, you know, wait, I say to myself, it's not more. It's do what is at hand with love and intensity. Do that, what is at hand. And one individual, one act, we have no idea how powerful that one act is. So focus on the quality, the love and cosmic energy of any one thing we do. And I think there's so many people, you know, who are not known at all. They haven't written books or created some kind of invent, whatever, but they have loved, and their love and their everything that love leads them to do is one of the most creative acts we can participate in. So then when we get ready to die, we think, well, it's all right. We know we're all one, but I've also come to realize we don't go back to this vast oneness that just all our individuality is gone. No, our work is to bring to that one the uniqueness, the individuality of our lives, that is part of the design of the one. And so whatever we can do, and it doesn't have to even be known in the world, as long as it's done in that love and understanding of who we are.
Absolutely. And what you just spoke of reminds me of what I was just recently in a conversation with somebody, and they were talking to one of their friends who works as a like a gas station attendant, and like it's on like on this right off the highway, and so there's a lot of people who are traveling through from all over the world, and they told that person who's a very like light, resonant, loving, like super open-hearted person. They said, you have the most important job in the entire world, because all of these people, they come in and they experience that force of love, and they experience that beauty and welcoming in that energy. And that's just going to resonate with them in a way that it's going to change their, whether it's that moment, that day, maybe it inspires to explore that love on a deeper level within themselves, because they just received it in a way maybe they hadn't before, right? And that's
I absolutely agree with that. Rick Archer has the podcast of Buddha at the gas pump. Buddha at the gas pump. And because it's, and in I think with gardeners, there's so many people that in the scale of what we think is important, that they change our lives, and it's not, all those other things are not important if we don't have that at the core of it. And, it just, it's so important when you go somewhere and people are kind to you, it changes your day. That is a powerful act of creativity.
Exactly. I don't think there's anything more powerful than that. I mean, that's the golden rule, right? That's what they outline. Treat others how you wish to be treated. And that's the energy you're creating within your community and your interactions. And they're going to spread that. And I think that's, for me, it makes me smile with optimism, because it's so simple. It's so simple.
All of it really is simple. And it keeps that, if you think of the light of the cosmos, that when we're kind, it can flow through us to the other person. So we keep it going. And if we're kind of, then it stops. It gets blocked a little bit. It's to let it flow, the best we can. And sometimes, we'll get grumpy, or we just feel irritable or whatever. I mean, just say to yourself, I'm so grumpy today, and just kind of let that grumpiness dissolve. Yeah. But we're going to feel all kinds of things, and that's okay. I can remember when my husband was so helpful in so many, in dissolving some of these cultural craziness types of things that I had. And I really got angry about something one time. And I felt so bad about being angry. And he said, why should you? I don't understand it. Why should you be angry about something you feel? You feel it. It's there. It's real. Yep. And take it from there.
Exactly.
But our culture is always this shame and punishment kind of thing. And to say, okay, why was I? Was there another way to, it's just an emotion. It's there for a reason. Let's look at it, deal with it.
Be with the emotion and do our best not to project the emotion in an unconscious fashion is really what it's all about. There's no need to feel any shame about any type of
anything. Is if you can say, I'm such a grump today, you're accepting what things aren't flowing quite like I'd like them to, but it's that self-responsibility. Yeah,
exactly. And then and I've noticed when I have that almost awareness of, things really aren't working in my favor today, it almost allows me to like chuckle about it and kind of laugh in a way. It's like,
step aside. Yeah, as you say, step back a bit.
Exactly. We kind of impede our own flow when we try and rigidly control it all, because so much of it is out of our control anyways, in a sense, like of life happening the way it happens. Like we just got to flow, keep grounded in the knowing of who we are, and then just do our best. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't think there's a lot of people are trying to and I have this sense in this, my conditioning is in the sense that I like to do and achieve and accomplish. Like I have a bunch of things that I'm working on, and I think it's
that's good. That's creative.
Thing. Right. Yeah. But at the same sense, it's like, I have to be very mindful. It's like, okay, I'm doing enough. Don't worry about it. Like we're already enough at our core. We are enough. We are worthy of love. And I think a lot of times we hold ourselves to the standard that if we don't do enough for the collective at large, we're not worthy of that love, and we're not worthy of that. And in a way, we unconsciously perpetuate what we're trying to alleviate.
But that's kind of been the culture. And I think, as we grow up. I mean, here we have all these things from our culture that can be all these doctrines, these worldviews, these belief systems, these prejudices, and the lack of knowledge of so many other ways of doing life. We're born into that, you know. So we've got to kind of, find our way through it, and stay, the old saying of stay with the force, let that force flow through you. My husband, one of the very profound experiences he had several experiences that he was going to die before he did. And indeed, he was killed also by in a car accident within 2 years after our son. But he had a hard time with this, but he realized that we're immortal, but he said, I'm not afraid to die. It's just that I'm not ready to go yet. But anyway, he had this experience with his son on the other side of how that absolutely, I'm not ready to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to die. And here's the whole thing is, in reality, he wasn't dying yet, at least. But he said that he realized, then Pishi just put one finger on his spine, and he just gave him that light, that love, that all that we are, that was flowing through him. And then something happened and he got scared again. And what he realized in that is that as long as he let that flow, it didn't matter. He didn't have to profess it to anyone. He didn't have to do anything with it, believe it, disbelieve. It was just there. As long as he just trusted it and let it flow through him, everything was possible. But then when he got scared, he popped out of the flow. He actually had the experience of popping out of the flow. And then that's when all of these things happen to us, but if we just can relax and let go and be in the flow.
Especially finding the flow within the chaos, if you will. And as we feel the walls are closing in around us, can we still sit with it? And I think that's the ultimate test. It's one thing to be nice and still and like with the flow and the sun is at our back and we're feeling great and strong. And it's a whole nother practice to integrate that
Yes.
stillness in the darkest of nights, which is
yes. And then it will be in everything we do,
exactly. So just for sort of more towards a wrap-up question, we're almost at about an hour and a half. This has been flying by. I'm sitting here and I have a whole bunch of other questions I could ask you. We could probably go on for like 3 or 4 hours if we wanted to. So Terence McKenna talked about this idea of like an archaic revival, right? And that term resonates with me in the sense of, we've really hit on this, the remembrance of who we are on a deeper level. I was wondering what your thoughts are as we integrate this new, deeper myth of meaning. How do you feel the story of mankind shifts? Like, what does this world that we can embody in the present look like? And actually, when we sort of generate a new myth, because I think that's what's emerging, a new myth, a new story that is truthful and resonant on a deeper level. What is that myth for you, and like how you see it, I would say, permeating throughout the culture, throughout the world, and what in the direction that we really can move in with that new sort of central myth and understanding of who we are on a deeper level?
It's of course, it's a great question. But I think that, looking at it historically, that this is the 5th time this urge within our species or within our culture has risen to the surface of culture of consciousness and is really doing business. I think we've discovered our past. We discovered a lot about our ancestors. We're more awake and listen to our indigenous peoples around the world. And so I think there's a lot of hope. And as I said before, the darkness will destroy us this time, I think, if we don't allow ourselves to become awakened to who we are. And I spent 2 years once we were kind of in semi-lockdown, just looking at what is going on in our world today, and what is this all about these last 2 years, and seeing plans for our future, And that's they're dark. Some of them are very dark. I'm looking also at all this incredible awakening. I love it. And technology itself has whereas before, if you talk, maybe you would have 20 people and you can have thousands. I mean, this is wonderful. We are using technology in a way to communicate and to connect. And that yet there is the ill part of ourselves that is planning to use it in a destructive way. Well, you can get kind of down. You can look at it various ways and think, will we make it this time? Well, my husband in his visions absolutely was convinced, because he had the vision of the merchants of light, which is where the book gets its name, that this is an energy field that through our love and our longing to be healed, we have drawn that energy field to the earth. And these beings who have already achieved this in other worlds can be born on our planet to help us. And also, we are helping ourselves because we pull this energy field. So everything we do is easier in this energy field. And he was just absolutely, my husband was absolutely convinced that we would make it. He said, I don't know what we have to go through. We're going to make it. And it was just, the vision was so powerful. But I had a vision earlier. It was the most powerful vision I'd ever had in my life, of a disc of consciousness. I knew it was cosmic consciousness. And it hovered over me and then spiraled as a female into my heart and sang through me. And I was with two other people. We were actually doing a ritual for our children and the children of the world. This, I have it in Merchants of Light and also in Miracle of Death, but it was realer than anything I've ever experienced. I mean, here was the light. I knew that I didn't have the ability to take in all that was in that disc, but she was like a converter of that energy. And that was cosmic consciousness itself. But it was so clear that she sang, we are the light around your planet. And I realized that light we had drawn, and it was around the planet. But it was like the communication was, we are connecting now to the planet. And we even had that experience of that energy flowing through. And I knew that was happening all over the world, that we are anchoring this light that we have drawn to us. Now it is anchored in the planet, and it's a field of energy in which, yes, we can do this. We most certainly can do this. And we have these luminous beings with us. And we are also those luminous beings, And so my feeling when I could put the dots together, it's just, I know we'll make it. We have to go through some transformations, but by knowing that this journey that we're on is not random, if you keep walking in a labyrinth, it's not a maze. You get to the center. So the thing is to take the journey, to look at ourselves, look at our own darkness, look at our talents, look at everything, be open to this flow, and we will be healed. And our healing heals the planet.
Absolutely. And that resonates deeply, because I feel the same way. Within myself, I feel the light is growing stronger. So how can that not if it's within me, it has to be out here too.
It's in the quantum field,
Right.
which is the spirit world. And we now have a science that supports mystical understanding. Thank heavens.
Right. Absolutely. It almost sort of, in a way, is able, the people who don't want to dive into the spiritual realm, it demystifies it a little bit, which is
that's it in that. And then you'll also find, here is this sea, eternal sea of energy. There's no difference. It's, well, as Fedalin Wolf said, that matter is how spirit looks in the physical universe. Matter is how spirit looks in the physical dimension.
Exactly.
Because we realize it's one energy. It just expresses itself in matter or in spirit, in the visible world, the invisible world. And we are part of that one energy.
Exactly. And in the realms of dimension that it plays in, beyond our even sensory perception normally.
Oh, yes. And there's there have to be potentials even beyond cosmic consciousness. We can't imagine, but we're creative beings.
Mm-hmm.
We can create whole universes when we really know who we are. And maybe we're in training now to.
Exactly. Well, that's funny. I had that same thought actually like last week about that sort of the totality of that, and like beyond even cosmic consciousness. There's the word infinite. I mean, it's truly infinite. Like there is no.
That's true. And I heard Sri Aurobindo say that, and I thought, that's right. A long time ago, I heard him say, read that he said it, and I thought, of course, if we're creative and there's infinite, we have this. This is our vastest imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's always something beyond that.
And as we step into the cosmic consciousness, it'll open the doorway to an even different type of an extension of that we can only imagine, right? So it's I think that makes the beauty of this. It's almost kind of like a game in a way, this dance of life, this dance of the sacred energy. Like you can really find your rhythm within it, right? And just sort of step in and let it take you on the journey it's going to take you, and where you go from there. It's beautiful. It's hard to even put into words the amount of beauty, because it's just sort of, you need to almost experience it just bask in that reverence, because it's all here.
That's right. And
just gonna say, all here, all now, all the time.
That's right. And it is a game, is in a way, it's a divine game. A divine game, and all of these polarities come into play, and we are learning how to work with them. We made some serious mistakes of thinking we wouldn't work with the other one, and that is deadly. But we're learning that. We're learning the loom of polarity is what reality is. So we're learning how to play this game in a much vaster, more loving and beautiful, pleasurable way, even. Exactly. Because there has to be, the universe needs our joy and our laughter. It needs that too, because there's so much sorrow. We need to balance it with the joy of being alive.
Exactly. A simple smile can change the world. So that's all we need. It's all we need. Every smile, even through the face of our suffering, because we can find the cosmic giggle in it. Sometimes I think and I was talking to Paul Chek on my podcast, and he said that God has a sixth sense of humor sometimes when you look at the totality of everything going on, and the whole, like, in the fact that it's all us, like even in the darkness, there's necessary polarities there. And, it's like, why would the universe do that to itself? That's kind of, I don't know, masochistic. I don't know what it is, but.
Or why would we do it to ourselves?
Right. Exactly. And it's like, all right, let's find the rhythm of life, and go with love. What would love do now? That's sort of the mantra I've had for myself. Ask that question. What would love do now? What would love do now? In any moment, and you're going to get the right answer, if there is a right answer. But
this whole energy of love, as the people who die or have the actual death experience in return, they experience love in such a vastness and a depth that they can't give words to it. And when we think of how much we're able to love, and that can be opened much, much wider even than what we know. And all of this consciousness is born, the whole ground of being, of consciousness, is love.
Absolutely. And it's ever expansive and infinite in its potential, right?
And yes, to be realized and lived.
Well, and I think that's what it might have been Rumi talked about. You just need to keep breaking your heart open enough, and that'll allow it to continue opening, right? To continue to go into the vulnerabilities of that energy of love. And you're going to have to, feel in order to, one, heal and grow and be. And, I think a lot of times we feel love and then we get broken from it and we run away from it altogether, when the reality is, if we can actually sit with, you know, some of the pain that may come if we open our heart and then learn a tough lesson of, you know, maybe breakup, whatever it may be, you know, grieving and death. Like a lot of times people close their hearts after death because it's like, wow, I love that. And now it's perceived gone. And
Oh,
it's in a way, it's an opportunity to expand our love to a different capacity.
it is the grief and the joy of love and the grief of love open our hearts. You know, it's all of these dimensions of our experience are important and necessary. I sometimes there's a love that you get to a place where you think you can't bear it, you can't, you know, that you can't quite conceive it or hold it, you know, because but we can if we stay with it, you know. We can,
and trust in it and go with the flow of it, believe in it, and that it's going to bring us to a beautiful place. There's I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Charles Eisenstein, but he wrote a beautiful book of, and it might be called The Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And this is the energy that he speaks of is just that. And it's the continuing to open up the heart and sit in that space and in that reverence, that awe. A lot of what we talked about, it all comes back to the love and the beauty. And, you know, I look out to the world and I go outside and it's like you try and be in, if you can be from the heart center of that beautiful world, it's already here. The love is already flowing, kind of waiting for us to recognize
aware of it.
Yeah.
What is his name? I don't know him.
Charles Eisenstein. Yeah.
And the book is?
I believe it's The Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. That's the central theme of it. I don't remember if that's the title or not.
I'll look up the name and I can find it. Thank you. It's beautiful.
It definitely resonates with a lot of what we've talked about here today. And in your own books, it's around that same, that universal energy. So, but Betty, this is a fantastic conversation. I mean, we're definitely gonna have to plan on having another one because there's more areas that I want to.
What we choose to do, right?
Exactly. There's so many areas that we could have continued to explore down, and but no, I'm just grateful for your work, your being, your presence, and really leading the way for this energy and this cosmic consciousness to actually, like, you've created such space for it to arise and to really be, and for people to not just like hear about it. Like for example, this conversation, we talked about it, but I'm also in the midst of talking about it, you're creating space to experience it as well, which is truly such a gift. So, you know, I want to thank you for that.
You. And it's such a delight to be with you because it's wonderful as I'm, you know, and if can be too many years, you know, I will step out of this physical body. How wonderful it is to know that there are people like you and other younger people who are living this and carrying this forward. You know, we do what little we can and we pass the torch, and you are giving the torch to so many people, you know. So that's wonderful to see and to know. And that's why we'll make it.
Absolutely. I have no doubt about it. Like that we're going to make it, even if it's, I would like to make it in my lifetime. I don't know if that's happening. I don't know what the timeline is on this, but we're definitely planting the seeds, if you will. And I think the beautiful forest will grow in its time. And, you know, you can't force a flower to grow before it's ready. It's got to go through the stages.
That's right, through its process. Who was it who said they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds?
I love that.
Yeah, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. I love it.
We're just gonna grow. Thank you for if anything, that burying is exactly what we needed, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to grow at all.
That was your point, and I agree. I agree. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll meet again.
Oh, absolutely. This will be, you know, like I said, there's so many more areas that I wanted to continue to dive down. So we'll definitely plan on another conversation.
Okay, we'll go there. So thank you.
Thank you to all the listeners for tuning in to the conversation, and we shall see you on the next episode.